When you are new to the Dhamma practice, or come from a very different background or tradition, it can be quite difficult to grasp certain ideas or concepts. And one of the especially troublesome words or ideas that plagued me for a very long time was the word Sankhara, which is often translated as fabrication or formation or something like that. It was used in so many different ways, and depending on the context, it always seemed to mean something different. No matter what translation I looked at, it never really made sense to me, and it always felt to me like the translator did not really know what they were actually translating. Today we have a deep look at the very word, and hopefully understand a lot better how it aligns with the rest of the practice and what it actually means. I think one of the most common problems is that there are so many different translations for the very same word. The most common ones would be likely fabrications or formations, and both of them are widely used by the most popular or most well-known translators. Yet other, less known translators or teachers translate the word as determinations, activations, activities, and many other things, and each of them highlights an aspect of the word that was useful, likely, for their understanding. Yet, given all those translations, it is not really clear what they are pointing to or why the word would be so important. In a sense, it is very, very difficult, if not impossible, to understand that word until you have seen what it means for yourself in your direct experience. But you should try nonetheless, because you only get it if you repeatedly try. Anyway, whenever there is such a multitude of translations and opinions, I often find it beneficial to look at the etymology of a word. In many cases, the background helps a lot. Same with womb attention as an example. And it is often a good idea not to translate at all. And to make it even worse, the word is used in multiple contexts, even in the suttas, with seemingly very different meanings. I know of at least 3 different contexts. Anyway, first, in the Pali, we usually encounter 2 very similar words, namely Sankhara and Sankhata. While they sound very similar, they mean very different things. Sankhara is a condition, so to speak, while Sankhata is what results from the condition. If you are somewhat mathematically inclined, the f of x to the left of an equation is what a Sankhara is, so to speak, the input, and the output would be Sankhata. Just a trick that I would use myself to try and remember what those words mean. So they are very different, even if they sound very similar. And in this video, we mainly want to focus on the word Sankhara, and the literal meaning of the word would be along the lines of that which puts together, while Sankhara means that which has been put together. And I'm not sure where I picked up that meaning, but I think another very fitting translation would be that which things stand upon. While the suttas use the word in various different situations, all of them have at least a hint of that meaning, the most general kind. While the word Sankhara seems very special, the identical principle occurs under very many different names in the suttas that we have a look at later, hopefully. And I personally like to compare the idea behind it with a 2-story house. The first story would be the necessary condition for the second story, as the second story is quite literally standing on the first one. The second story cannot exist without the first story. It fully depends on it. That is what basically a Sankhara is, a foundation for something else to stand on, a necessary condition, so to speak. And further, if there was something wrong with the foundation, could the thing that stands on that foundation be unaffected? Well, of course not. Only a fool would buy a second-story apartment in a great condition that is standing on top of a ruin. So that is kind of the fundamental principle behind the contemplative style of Sutta Buddhism. The Sutta also give us a very nice, relatable example for the word, and for example, Majjhima Nikaya number 146. There the Bhikkhu Nandaka is teaching the order of bhikkhunis as such. Suppose there was a large tree standing with hardwood. The roots, trunks, branches, and leaves, and also shadow were all impermanent and perishable now. Now suppose someone was to say, there's a large tree standing with hardwood. The roots, trunk, and branches and leaves are all impermanent and perishable, but the shadow is permanent, lasting, eternal, and imperishable. Would they speak rightly? Well, of course not. And everyone who studied Buddhism for a while knows it. In that example, the tree is a Sankhara for the shadow, the Sankhata, even if they seem very different in nature. Similarly, he also compared the principle with an oil lamp. Suppose there was an oil lamp burning. The oil, wick, flame, and light were all impermanent and perishable. Now, suppose someone would say, while the oil lamp is burning, the oil, the wick, and the flame are all impermanent and perishable, but the light is permanent, lasting, eternal, and imperishable. Would they speak rightly? Well, of course they would not speak rightly. The very foundation or fuel of the process is impermanent, and so must everything that burns independent of that fuel. So that is the principle. We do not look too much at the actuality of our experience. We look at the condition, at the underlying causes, at the fuels that keep the process going. And as you might have noticed by now, the word Sankhara is not too special and occurs in various different ways under various different words in the suttas. The principle, however, remains the same. There is something that exists only because something else is there that allows for its existence. This is a fundamental principle of the entirety of the Dhamma practice. And that practice, and even virtue, which is not yet Dhamma, is based upon that. In the suttas you find the same idea under various different names. Sometimes Sankharas are called sources, origins, backgrounds, nutriments, fuels, peripheral conditions, the nature of things, the foundation, the basis, and most of all, the root of things. And the roots are something that something else grows from. So they follow the very same principle. Over and over again, you see the principle of dependent origination, which is the teaching that is special to the Buddhas. Sankharas are just one way to talk about that. And this very idea is the principle of dependent origination. The principle is the teaching that is special to the Buddhas. With this, that is. With Sankharas, there are Dhammas. With conditions, there are results. This is the only thing that is completely out of reach unless someone else points you towards it. It is a true miracle that anyone could self-awaken to that. The Buddha even said that on one occasion, that he teaches only one thing and he is true to his words. This is the one thing. The principle of dependent origination, the Dhamma, the nature of all things, which is that. Instead of looking at the actuality of your experience, you look at the source. You direct your attention towards the source. You look at the womb. You look for the Sankharas and you apply your attention there instead of looking at the objects of your senses. Or in different words, you direct your attention toward the womb of your experience. This I have explained in one of my latest videos on Yoniso Manasikara in depth, but the principle remains the same. If we want to get rid of something that bothers us, we remove the cause of it so that it cannot arise again. In a sense, we prepare for suffering in advance. We do not deal with suffering when it is there, we prepare for it in advance. Imagine that your roof is leaking. Would you just mop up the water whenever it is raining, or would you be better off if you fixed the roof so that the cause for the water coming into your house is fixed? In Dhamma terms, the worldling would be constantly mopping up water, while the noble disciple is fixing the roof. They also mop up the water, so the house is not getting damaged more than necessary or something like that. But they also, and most of all, they are fixing the conditions that lead to their suffering and misery for a long time. Dhamma practice is always directed at the roots, at the sources, the origins, or the Sankharas. If you have a problem with addiction, you try to dig up the root view that leads to the repeated arising of craving. Then you undermine and pull up the root by contemplating and seeing that it is dangerous, as a dart, as impermanent. And every root that is impermanent can only lead to problem, no matter what it grows from. Better don't touch it, better drop it, better leave it alone. That is kind of the thing. You try to train the mind to see such things as problematic so that it doesn't touch it anymore. While it is a good idea to apply this principle wherever you can, it must be applied on a certain level of generality if you want to overcome suffering for good. Only when you have found the root of all your problems can you truly be free. And the suttas offer us a variety of different ways to contemplate like that. They give you various complete practices that you can pick from, but you must make sure that everything is covered and that there is nothing overlooked or ignored. You cannot leave any blind spots. You cannot see any part of your experience that is not conditioned, so to speak. You can have a look at the Sutta Nipata number 3.12 for many examples that all follow this very same principle, and it's always in pairs. And suppose medicants, they questioned you thus. There are skillful teachings that are noble, emancipating, and leading to awakening. What is the real reason for listening to such teachings? You should answer, only so as to truly know the pairs of teachings. This is suffering, this is the origin of suffering. All the suffering that originates is caused by ignorance. by choices, by consciousness, contact, feeling, craving, grasping, karma, fueling, perturbation, and so on. So as you can see, there are many, many pairs that you could contemplate if you are inclined like that. But it's always pairs. With this is. It's always Sankhara, Sankhara. Whatever you find in the suttas in terms of Dhamma, it is a way of putting exactly this into practice. Very important practice. You don't have to study it all the time. You have to put it into practice. This is what is meant by teaching only one thing. There is no other hidden secret or anything, no hidden revelation. It is surprisingly simple, surprisingly, in a sense, it's even, if you would not experience the most biggest imaginable relief possible, you would think of it as a kind of boring even. But anyway, so in essence, through right practice of non-craving and discernment or contemplation, you want to get to the root of your suffering. You want to find your personal root and generalize further and further. Nothing else. It is not about non-self or lofty states, not about superpowers or anything like that. Those things are at best byproducts or stepping stones of the practice. But only if you have them. You don't have to cultivate them. If you are already inclined that way, then you can use that skillfully to also make progress in the Dhamma. You don't have to incline yourself that way to make progress. But anyway, contemplation literally means that you muse on this very principle on a sufficiently general level so that you can no longer ignore it. You simply use one of the mentioned things as a basis for your contemplation and see how suffering must be the result of ignoring the impermanence of that basis. Then you simply cannot cling any longer if the message truly sunk in. Yet you must include everything in that contemplation and must find a Sankhara where you truly see that nothing could possibly be excluded. Take something that feels close to you and clarify the relationship and dependence on something that is clearly not on you and see how both intertwine. See the unownability or anicca of that foundation, of that Sankhara. The actuality inherits that property, just like in the many examples from before. The shadow inherits, so to speak, the impermanence from the tree. You must saturate your experience with that understanding until it clicks and your Dhamma eye opens. All the pieces of the path must come together for this. That can only happen based on sufficient virtue. And by the way, virtue follows the very same principle. It is just that you do not uproot on the most general level, but you still uproot. You still uproot sensuality sufficiently. So you see it as dangerous. You contemplate it as not worth having. You contemplate that your dependence on feeling good is not so good. And one of the ways to contemplate this would be in terms of intentions of greed, aversion, and delusion. No matter what you do, there is always an intention there. When that intention changes, whatever you have been doing will change with it. When the foundation changes, everything changes with it. And there is no space for any you there or in between to control the process, essentially. Same with the six senses. You surely cannot control what the senses sense. Yet your entire existence stands and falls with that. Whatever they give you, you have to work with. Is it really a good idea to hold on to them? They could change at any time and you would suffer on account of it if you are no longer supplied with what you deem agreeable. Yet one final remark might be necessary here. Quite often people contemplate all of this completely devoid of any relationship with the Four Noble Truths. They try to reason their way out of samsara. All of those contemplation must happen in relation to suffering and how to stop it. Otherwise, it is just intellectual wordplay. The limitless liberation and peace that the Dhamma can bring will only happen when you plant the seeds of instructions on fertile ground. If there is no cultivated virtue beforehand, and I mean on the level of views and values that you uproot, then it is as if you plant some cucumber seed on concrete ground. It will not work, and it will only lead to frustration, and you will abandon the method, thinking that it does not work, while you are just missing the prior groundwork. But anyway, let us now come to the most important parts. Sankharas are a complex and often misunderstood term. Sankharas are foundations of your experience. Sometimes they are also used in the context of intentions, and they are kind of intentions, as intentions kind of condition everything. Intentions of greed, aversion, and delusion that bring suffering, so to speak. But we like to use it in the same or in a very similar way in all contexts, so it does make kind of sense. And when the foundation of something is impermanent, everything that is standing on top of that foundation must also be impermanent. It inherits the property of impermanence. And what is impermanent is suffering, and what is suffering is surely not mine. I should throw it away, otherwise I will suffer on account of it when it changes inevitably. Throw away all your ignorance of this principle, and with it, all your attachments and values. Only then can true freedom arise. Once you have thrown everything away, this is when the practice picks up speed, let's put it like that. When you have understood the most general, most basic principle of dependent origination. There are lots of habits remaining, no question about it. But after you understood the Dhamma, it is only about the remaining taints. So anyway, this should be enough for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what I do, feel free to like and subscribe and do all the YouTube things. But until then, I wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.